Headlamps by Tony Richards. Read by Huw Carr. Directed by Brenden James. There was the smell of blood that night. A breeze had sprung up from the west, coming across the Utah border into Colorado. It brought with it the scent of pine, the aroma of fresh wood, the subtlest hint of melting snow. That should have been all. It was not. The smell of blood was there, as real as your own hand. It permeated the shadows.
"Maybe I should turn in, get some sleep," said Jethro.
"Can you?" asked Great Uncle Luke. "Do you think you will?" Jethro considered that for a while.
"No, perhaps not."
He sat up, restlessly in his chair, gazed out into the darkness beyond the porch. The world had become flat, two-dimensional. Silhouettes surrounded him like headstones in a graveyard. To his left were the 30-odd cabins which made up his tiny northern Colorado town. An isolated town with no shops or telephones or police, just a general store which doubled as a post office. To his right was Luke's lumber mill, where he was working through his college vacation. Beyond that lay the vast, impenetrable tangle of the forest, and towering over it all, purple-black and godlike, was the mountain. It suffused the corners of his view, a bulking monolith. Even as a child, it had always filled him with awe. A little fear, too, he realized. Fear of an avalanche, of being crushed beneath 1,000 tons of stone. Fear of the timber wolves which dwelt in the high regions. Fear, most of all, of the treacherous, winding road which clambered along the mountainside, and of the terrible things which happened there. The road had been built long before his time. It started at the main highway 10 miles away, forging through the dense forest to the great stone spire. There it rose, snaking up the side of the rock until it turned and disappeared high up around the mountain. From there, Jethro thought it wound back down until it joined the road to Glenwood Springs. It had been so long since anyone had used it that he was not sure.
"Something bad's gonna happen tonight, isn't it?" he asked.
Great Uncle Luke removed his home-rolled cigarette from a wrinkle that could just be called his mouth. As he leant forwards to stub it on the porch boards, his grey, wispy hair fell across his forehead. He let it lie there. "You tell me," he said.
"I know it. I can feel it. Something really bad. Something—"
Jethro faltered. The statement became a question.
"To do with the road?"
Luke saw nothing. He was busy rolling another cigarette. Jethro noticed, though, that the old man's nimble fingers had become unsure. That answered his question well enough. Something moved high above them.
"My God, look up there! I was right!"
Out of the trees, at the foot of the mountain, a pair of headlamps had appeared. rectangular headlamps, those of a sports car. They began to traverse the mountain face like twin fireflies moving quickly. Too quickly.
Idiot! What's he doing up there this time of night? Don't he know anything?
Luke's head came up slowly, grudgingly. The bright, distant headlamps were reflected in his narrowed eyes. John Tyrrell shifted gear from fourth right down to second, coming around the next bend. The MG protested, slowed a little. There was a thump from the trunk as the suitcases slid across. The tail nearly swung out. Tyrrell brought the car swiftly under control, cursed, and dropped his speed to 20 miles per hour. His headlamps were barely making an impression on the darkness. 15 yards of slender, rugged road was all he could see. That and the unyielding rock wall to his right. The bends came up on him with terrifying suddenness. Worst of all, he could not make out where asphalt gave way to thin air. Only guess. His imagination ran riot. Lousy hicks. They could have at least put up a barrier. It was some start to a holiday. He had come down from Rawlins, Wyoming, heading for Pikes Peak and his hotel. Now he realized that he should have started out earlier. Dusk had fallen soon after he crossed the state line, and night was fast on its heels. Somewhere, several miles back, he had taken the wrong fork. It was an easy enough mistake to make. Not so easy, though, was getting off the road he'd gone down. It wound tortuously through the forest for some way, getting rougher and narrower all the while. Then came up onto this infernal mountain. By the time he realized his error, it was too late to turn round, too far to back up, too dangerous. He decided to go on, see where the road led. And now he was regretting it. Cautiously, he shifted back up to third. The speedometer needle began to creep. Tyrrell knew he should slow down, better to arrive late than not at all. He found it hard, though, to fetter his impatience. Besides, he wanted more than anything to get off the mountain. What if another car? As if his very thought had summoned them, twin headlamps appeared on the road far ahead. They were coming towards him. "There's old Harry," said Luke. "Right on time as usual." Jethro sprang up from his seat, began to move forwards, then stopped. He stood at the edge of the porch, his entire body trembling. To Luke, he looked like a puppet with its strings snared, all ready but incapable of motion.
"Can't we do anything?"
Jethro shouted.
"Nothing, except sit back and watch."
"That's callous, Uncle."
Luke seemed unperturbed.
"That's fact. Anyone who goes up that mountain at night can't expect help from no one but himself. Old Harry's killed 14 motorists in the last 35 years he's been up there. Nothing you or I do will stop him."
He could not seem to look directly at the mountain. His gaze kept flickering away. Above, the headlamps were closing fast. Luke's face lost some of its calmness. The lines and wrinkles deepened with sorrow.
"Course," he went on, "I pity that fool up there. All on his own. Mountain on one side and a 400-foot drop on the other. And old Harry coming at him with that big old dynamite truck."
"Why does he keep doing it, though?"
Jethro asked.
"Why keep on killing folks he doesn't even know?"
Luke shook his head.
"He always was like that. Mean. Unforgiving. He got hurt in a stupid, pointless way, and I guess he doesn't see why he should be alone."
"Oh my God,"
was all Tyrell could say. The words came out as a little more than a gasp. Ahead, the opposing headlamps vanished behind an out-jutting rock, then reappeared, much closer. They were huge truck lamps, he realized with a sickening shock. Huge and luminous and menacing. They grew in his vision, bearing down on him like nemesis. The darkness might have been playing tricks on his eyes, but it seemed that they were moving even faster than he, and he was doing, he could barely shift his gaze to the speedometer, 30. Tyrell began to panic. Immediately he heard an anguished squeal as his rear outside wheel left the asphalt and clung to the narrow strip of gravel by the drop. He swerved the car back in, too hard, and nearly hit the mountain. "Calm down. You're not dead. Yet." He made sure the car was steady, then began gently to brake, taking care not to lock the wheels. At the same time, he put his right hand firmly on the horn. It blared out in one steady, continuous note, rending the serenity which existed outside Tyrell's skull. He kept at it for what seemed like ages. His hand came free only when he realized that surely the truck driver could see him well enough. The other vehicles showed no sign of stopping. It was as if the driver were blind or crazy. Sweat was seeping into Tyrell's eyes. His hand had become slippery on the wheel. There was a fire in him no amount of dousing would cool. And at the heart of that fire, a terrible rage.
"You maniac!"
he screamed at the oncoming lights.
"Stop!"
It was close enough to see the truck now. At first, it was only a large grey shape looming out of the night. Then he could make it out in more detail. He sucked in a sharp breath. The truck was caked with mud and rust. Patches of moss grew on its sides. It was badly dented in several places. The front fender crumpled like baking foil. Just underneath the headlamps was a license plate, local, but incredibly ancient. The tires were whirling quilts of bald rubber and patches. He had never seen anything like that on the road. The truck was almost upon him. Tyrell looked up at the driver in the darkened cab and screamed.
"It was the autumn of 34,
Luke was saying. In the town, a light had come on in every house. The sports car horn had shattered the inhabitants' slumber. Pale, tired faces crowded each window. No one moved to help, though. They stayed safe behind their homes, waiting for the sports car driver to lose his nerve, plunge his vehicle right off the edge to be lost among the cover of the pine trees far below, as if they were spectators at some gruesome sport.
Not a bad little year, kind of peaceful around these parts. Nobody knew how soon the war would come, how many people would get killed. We were all getting along, minding our own business. Plenty of jobs about, too. A quarrying company had set up nearby. They were blasting on the far side of the mountain, and they hired men from this town. Pete Dane, him who owns the general store now. Jerry Driscoll, little guy got killed in the Pacific. And Harry. They'd go up the mountain every day on that same road. It was new then, kind of a novelty. Everybody used it in those days. It had smooth, neat asphalt and a real iron crash barrier, though that's rusted away now. Like I said, they were peaceful times. Strange that such horror could be born out of such peace.
He grimaced round the fresh, unlit cigarette in his mouth. It was badly rolled. The paper was coming loose, the tobacco dropping out. He did not notice.
That evening, everyone was packed up and ready to go home, all except Harry. They'd put him in charge of the explosives, and he loved it. He was a big, lumbering man like an ox, maybe a little touched. People didn't like him much. That's why they gave him that job. They didn't care. The danger never bothered them. He'd get powder all over his clothes, throw sticks of dynamite about like they were candy bars. And he was still fiddling around when it was time to go. The others left him to it. After a while it got dark, and Harry started back in the dynamite truck. He wouldn't leave it there for fear it would get stolen, but he went slowly, carefully. What he didn't know was that back in the town some kid, he was 26 actually, but he acted like a kid, he got juiced to the eyeballs on moonshine and decided to take a nighttime drive up that road in his car. He came roaring up at 35, and Harry didn't see him till it was too late. God knows how they didn't both go off the edge. Harry was always a good driver, and the kid, I guess, he was just drunk lucky. The car slammed against the mountain wall, stayed there. The truck came off badly, though, and Harry even worse.
At first, Terrell could not believe what he saw. It had to be some trick of the light. The thing he had seen driving the truck was anything but human. It was emaciated beyond belief, its face a mere skull with skin stretched across. The skin itself was burnt and black in places, scarred in others. The lips and eyelids were torn, rotten, the eyes sunken and wild. Yellowed tufts of scalp and two straggling lengths of beard. One ear was missing. But worst of all was the insane, gloating smile composed of a crescent of broken and decaying teeth. The creature leaned forward right through the windshield, which Tyrell realized was smashed, and grinned at him. Its broken, bony fingers tightened on the wheel. Tyrell broke away with alarm. He knew now that the creature intended to force him out into the abyss, and he also knew that he would not let it. He glanced ahead, saw his chance. The road had widened very slightly, and the thing driving the truck, in its eagerness to kill, had come out too far. There was a gap, not much, but maybe just enough to squeeze the MG through. At the last moment, he wrenched the car away from the drop. The screech of metal against metal filled his ears.
The truck skidded round, Luke continued. It slammed head first into the rock. Harry, of course, went right through the windshield. His face was carved in, cut to pieces, and some say he lost his left ear. He went halfway through, then the glass caught on his belt, slashed his belly, and he slumped back moaning. Lay there for quite some time, half unconscious. Finally, he straightened up enough to realize the truck might explode. It was a blessing it hadn't already. Or maybe not, thinking about it. By now, he was on fire. Remember all that powder on his clothes? His shirt was burning right down the front as he scrabbled out of that cab. His chest got scorched, and his face, everything. That would have finished most men, but Harry was stronger than most. He ripped the shirt off and began staggering towards the other car. The kid was still there, dazed and only just sobering up, and he was gonna kill him. It was then that he saw himself reflected in the kid's windscreen. Luke's face puckered up with the anguish of the memory. Poor fella. What it must have been like, seeing himself turned into something barely human. He stared a while, and then it sank through what had happened. His fingers clawed at his ruined face, like he was making sure. The last thing the kid saw, Harry was back in the truck, turning around and heading back into the mountains. He was howling all the way like a wolf caught in a trap. He's never been down since. There's berries and nuts for him to eat up there, small animals to catch, and the truck was well supplied. Toolkit, hand crank generator, spare battery, 3 jerry cans of extra fuel. So Harry stays hidden up there and only comes out on those nights when someone's fool enough to use the road, forces them off the road, and they go right down into the forest underneath the trees where no one will ever find or see them again. Come the end of October, the heavy snows come and the cars are lost for good. He shuddered, gesturing to the forest. 14 cars somewhere out there, moldering to dust, and in them, almost like they're in coffins, 14 drivers who faced Harry and lost. Like I said, he never was the forgiving kind. The folks down here have never had the guts to hunt him down. Old Harry's got enough explosives up there to bring the entire mountain down around our heads, and folks would rather let him kill off strangers than disturb him. Oh, once in a while the county sheriff, Henry Dobbs, comes snooping round looking for missing persons. We lie, say we've never seen him. Then Henry'll go up, have a look for himself. He finds nothing, of course. Just an empty road that no one uses anymore. And that's the end of it. Folks go missing in this state all the time. It's no big deal. We could change that, I suppose. But we're all too scared.
His gaze had fallen from the scene above. He looked up just in time to see the headlamps converge. Number 15. He covered his face with his hands. And then Jethro shouted,
"My God! The sports car's through!"
Above the noise and the wrenching, above the fear of being crushed alive, two things in particular shocked Tyrell as he passed the truck. The first was the faded "Danger! Explosives" painted on its side. The second was the overpowering, acrid smell. He placed it in an instant. If the dynamite inside was as old as the truck, then it was sweating nitroglycerin by the bucketful. He was amazed it had not blown up long ago. As if, it seemed, only the driver's willpower was holding the truck together. As soon as he was through, Tyrell surveyed the damage to the MG. The left side had been scored and dented, but not too damaged. The right side, the side that had been pressed against the mountain face, was wrecked. He felt glad he was carrying no passengers. All the glass of that side had been smashed, the bodywork crushed inwards. All told, he had been lucky. Much too lucky. He glanced in the rear-view mirror. The truck was still there, heading down the mountain road away from him. Tyrell had hoped it might have been forced off the ledge itself, but somehow it had managed to get by. As he watched, its brake lights winked on. The truck slowed to a halt. Then it began to reverse up the gradient, fast. Tyrell moaned softly as he saw the driver lean out the side window to stare at him. The MG was slowing down, by now on a steep uphill slope. Tyrell put pressure on the gas. All he got in reply was a loud clanking noise from under the bonnet. Something in the engine had given. He shifted down to first and continued the tortured ascent, praying that the car would not fail him now. The truck's rear lights were not working. Either they were broken or they had failed some years ago. Trying to concentrate on the road ahead, Tyrell did not see that it was upon him till it hit. A shudder ran right through the car. Tyrell was thrown against the steering wheel, then back again, his neck whiplashed. A multicolored skyrocket flared up from the region of his collarbone and erupted in his head. He pumped on the accelerator, but the clanking from the engine only grew worse. It was then that he noticed the town below. So tiny was it, so engulfed by the forest, that he had not seen it in all the excitement. It was ablaze with light. They were watching him, and not one of them had come up to help. He sounded the horn 3 times in a desperate distress call. The truck hit again. This time the car slid forward several feet. Once more he knew, and he would be off. He sounded the horn again. "Help me!" A dark chasm ahead of him caught his attention. No more than a few yards further on, the road disappeared into nothingness. It took Tyrell almost too long to realize he had come to a hairpin bend, practically driven himself off. He hauled on the wheels savagely and got the car round. A feeling of victory welled up inside him. The truck would not be able to follow him here, not backwards. He caught one glimpse of it, trying to crawl around. Then it vanished.
"Where's it gone?"
asked Jethro.
"Has it fallen?"
Luke looked puzzled for a moment, then shook his head.
"The mule trail," he said.
"What?"
"Old Harry always was cunning. There's an old pioneer trail up there. It's a shortcut, runs most of the way back up the mountain. Men built it a long time before the road. Cut it out of the bare rock with no more than a few picks and shovels. It's just wide enough to let the truck through. Old Harry'll have to go slow, reversing all the way, but even so, he'll head off the sports car further up the mountain. All he needs to do is back out into the road and he'll be facing him again."
He had spoken a death sentence. The 2 men stared at each other across the porch, Luke solemn and resigned, Jethro quivering between rage and despair. At last, rage won.
"It isn't fair," he shouted. "Old Harry should have been the one to get hurt. It should have been that kid. He should have died."
Luke almost wanted to laugh at his great-nephew. What was the point of raking up an injustice 35 years old?
"It's hard to kill a fool," he said. "That kid came to hardly any harm at all, lived to a ripe old age. Wiser, maybe, but not crippled. All he did was crack his head on the dashboard. Got him a little scar, like T-shaped, just below the hairline."
"I'd like to kill him,"
Jethro said.
"Sure," said Luke. "And I'm sure sometimes he'd like to kill himself."
The radiator was steaming by now. The car was about ready to pack up. Tyrell did not care. He would buy himself a new car when he got home, now that he was able to go home. The hotel was still holding his reservation. He would drive there tomorrow in the daylight and have the best holiday of his life. In the bar, perhaps, celebrating. He felt in a champagne mood. He had won, and without any help from the faint hearts in the town. Reaching out one hand, he patted the MG's dashboard lovingly. Who would have thought that a light sports car could beat a heavy truck? He would, he thought indulgently, keep it in his garage for sentimental value. The engine started to lose any power it had left. Come on, baby.
If you can get a truck over the side, then you can finish this road. Then why, if the truck fell, the thought came, didn't I hear the explosion? The car gave one final splutter and stopped. High above him on the road, a huge grey shape detached itself from the darkness. Tyrell's mouth went dry, his features rigid. The great round headlamps came out, dazzling him, filling his mind as they roared towards him. Tyrell was frozen in their glare. He did not scream this time. Never would again. Oblivion wrapped him in its grasp and claimed him. The entire town came rushing out of doors as the truck exploded. They stood in the grass before the forest, mouths agape, faces alight with the pure white glow from the mountainside. It was like the 4th of July. The truck erupted 3 times, each blast louder and more violent than the last. Scorched debris was flung to the far corners of the wind. Vast gouts of flame leapt up to challenge the night sky and emblazon it with red. Some reached their zenith only to plunge down and light the treetops far below. The small MG was invisible, enveloped in the blaze. Finally, the road itself broke up and collapsed. A number of people began to cheer.
"Listen to them,"
Jethro snarled. "A man was just killed up there."
"The 15th and the last," Luke sighed. "A very brave man. Funny how it's always the good ones who get hurt, never the cowards and the fools."
He suddenly looked like he was going to cry.
"Well, great-nephew, it's all over now. Old Harry can rest in peace at last."
He ran his hands through his hair, ever so briefly. His fingertips alighted on a tiny T-shaped scar just below the hairline. His eyes closed, tightly shut, pressing out tears.
"Thank God I don't have to watch that anymore."
Jethro was not listening to him. He had walked right off the porch and was staring at the mountain, watching something which had moved off from the inferno. Off to his left, a sickly hush had fallen over the crowd. 4 high up on the mountain, a huge round pair of truck headlamps were moving along the road. Except there was no longer any road.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Press the notification bell to be up to date with every new story. And as always, look out for the monsters.